when you feel called to ministry, the first thing you should do is tell your pastor. And Southern Baptist churches in general, have sort of gotten away from this. African American churches still do it largely. And that is that when a church has one of their young men say, I feel called to preach, churches historically would license that young man to preach. And I know Lifeway still makes these. You can get them at church supply stores, a license to preach. Now, licensing does not have the same, in Baptist life, it does not have really much status at all. It's not the same as ordination. But it says, what licensing does, it says, okay, we acknowledge that you say you're called. We're going to give you opportunity to demonstrate your calling. And so I think churches need to get back to this, that we teach our young people that if you feel called to ministry, we want to know about it. And especially if a young man says, I feel called to preach, we license him to preach. We give him opportunities to preach. And it can be letting him have a class. It can be helping him get set up in a nursing home. At Buck Run, we recently had preaching night. We had 3 of our interns preach one night, had about 80 people come out just to hear them preach. We gave them an opportunity. So you license someone to preach. It does not have the same legal status, and certainly in Baptist life, it's not the same as ordination. But it's a good way for the church to say, we're watching you. We're going to encourage you. And we're going to give you opportunities to demonstrate your calling. And if we concur, if after a while you've demonstrated that you are indeed called and we see God's gifting, we're going to give you more and more opportunities, and sooner or later, we'll ordain you. Now, ordination comes when you are called to a specific ministry, that is by a church. So not just that you feel called, but now you are called by a church or some organization connected with the church to do some particular function. So I was on staff at Ashland Avenue Baptist Church in the 1980s. I was the minister of music and youth. That was a non-ordained position. When I went there, I was just 20 years old. But after a few years, Brother Range said, I want us to ordain you, because he more and more was letting me preach. He wanted me to fulfill the functions of a pastor. He was letting me administer the ordinances, and ultimately he was setting me up to be a successor, which in fact I was. So they later ordained me. So I was ordained by the Ashland Avenue Baptist Church after I had spent years in ministry there, demonstrating to them my calling. My son Michael was a member at Buck Run. He'd been faithful in service there. He was a seminary student here. The First Baptist Church of Lancaster, Kentucky asked him to come be associate pastor. And upon their request, Buck Run ordained him. Now, here's what I want you to understand, is that it's traditional that your home church ordains you, not the church that calls you. Now, because we are Baptist and we believe in total church autonomy, this isn't a hard and fast rule. This is just tradition, but it's a wise tradition. So a church could call you and ordain you. They've got the right to do that. It's not a question of whether or not they have the right to. But it just makes sense that the church that has observed you over a period of time would be the church that ordains you. So that's why a home church typically ordains at the request of a church that's calling you to ministry. And there's just a joy in that. Your home church and people that have poured themselves into you and taught you in Sunday school and maybe even took care of you in the cradle roll or whatever, that they're a part of your ordination. And often representatives from the new church will also attend, depending on how far it is. But that's typically the way it goes. Now, when someone is ordained, let's talk about ordination and what it means and how it works and exactly how you do it. So ordination does have legal status. So the government recognizes ordination, and that's why one reason why it's a big deal. It changes your tax status, for instance. Now, typically in my pastoral ministry class on campus, I have the local Guidestone representative, Don Spencer, come, and he spends 2 days, about 3 hours, with my class, and he goes through all the financial ramifications of ordination, and I don't have his expertise, but I will tell you this, that right now it's under court challenge, but there has been for a long time an exemption given by the government to ordained people. And the government does this for all religions. It's not just Christians. So anybody that's ordained by their religion, it can be the Baha'i faith, it can be Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish. If they are paid by that religious organization that recognizes their ordination, they can designate, the organization can designate a portion of their salary as housing allowance, and that is tax-free. Now that's a huge break, because at the same time, if you have a mortgage, you're getting the interest break on your mortgage, but you're not paying taxes on the money that you're paying that interest with, so that's called the double dip. And ordained people have gotten this double dip for some time. It's come under court challenge before. Famously, maybe 20 years ago, Rick Warren fought a battle all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won. Congress got involved a little bit. Congress has acted like they're going to do whatever they can to maintain the clergy exemption, but it keeps getting challenged by the left, especially like the American Atheist. They challenged it once, and the judge said, you don't have standing to challenge it. And so they threw it out, but now they figured out a way to get standing to challenge, and it's under challenge again. So that could change. We could lose that, but I hope not. And I don't think so, because even liberal clergy are in favor of this. And again, it's not something given to any specific religion, but the atheists are claiming that they're excluded from it because they're atheists. And this is the rub. So ordination matters in your finances. So I would encourage you to learn what you can. If you're Southern Baptist, you can contact the Guidestone representative in your state association here in Kentucky. That is Don Spencer at the moment, and he's been in that job for a long time. But you can contact Guidestone, and any state convention will help you understand the law about what ordination does for you financially. That's not our main concern, but hey, if the government is going to give us that break, we'd be fools not to take it. But that aside, ordination does say, we attest that this man is called of God, and we see evidence of his calling, his gifting, and his character. And therefore, we set him aside to do the work of the ministry. So that's what ordination does. And that's why the church that has observed that person should be the church to do it. We're setting him aside for ministry. So when a church ordains someone, typically what they do is they will enable other churches that want to send their ordained brethren to sit on the council. And typically, so here's where Baptist polity is a little strange in that each church is autonomous, and it's the local church that is ordaining the candidate, okay? But the local church invites ordained brethren from other churches to come and sit on the council. And in essence, the council advises the church whether or not they think the candidate is fit for ordination and whether or not to proceed with the ordination. So you've got people invited to come and to examine the candidate who, in the end, won't get to vote on whether or not to ordain the candidate. They vote to recommend to the church whether or not to ordain the candidate. So the way it goes, you have two parts to the ordination. Again, this is traditional. This is not biblical. It's not set in stone, but it's the way Baptists have historically done it. And that is, we have a meeting of the ordination council to examine the candidate. And they have what has lovingly been called the interrogation. I know that sounds terrible and scares people to death, like, oh, we're going to interrogate him. Well, it's not like, you've got bright lights in his eyes and you're putting bamboo shoots under his nails or anything. Not that kind of an interrogation. But you're just asking him questions. And the questions you can expect to be asked in an ordination council are, first of all, give an account of your salvation, give an account of your call to ministry. If you're married, give an account of your wife's understanding of this calling, and then they'll ask doctrinal questions. Now, when I lead in an ordination council, I stick to the top tier doctrinal issues and the spiritual qualifications that are given in Scripture. So I'm going to go through the text of 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I'm going to just go through those and ask the candidate, do you have this? Are you apt to teach? And do you lead your house well? Do you have a good reputation in the community? I'm going to ask them these questions from 1 Timothy 3, and then I'm going to ask them the main doctrinal issues. Tell me about your understanding of God. I'm going to listen carefully for his Trinitarian orthodoxy. I'm going to ask him about his understanding of Scripture, salvation, the return of Christ, sanctification, these general things. I am not going to ask him specific questions about eschatology, for instance. When you get, like at Buck Run, most of our ordination councils will have upwards of 50 people on them. You have 50 Baptists together. That's enough Baptists to get in 2 or 3 good fights over eschatology. I'm not going into all-mill and pre-mill and pre-wrath and all these different views. I think it's incumbent on anybody we ordain to believe in a bodily return of Christ. To me, that is unequivocal, unassailable, and essential to orthodoxy. So I want to know they believe in the bodily return of Christ. Are they looking for it? And beyond that, I'm really not going to go into great detail. And there are a lot of things. So I'm not going to ask his position on election. If he tells me he believes in inerrancy, he gives me a good description of what salvation is, and how one can have it by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. I'm not going to get into whether or not he has a view of particular redemption. I'm not going to use the C word. Are you a Calvinist? I'm just not going to do that. Those are, to me, lower tier levels of things. and I'm going to listen a lot for the guy's attitude. Now, if we're ordaining the guy at Buck Run, I'm already going to know the answers to these things long before that we get in that room. And it's your job, if you ordain somebody, you should know too. I went to an ordination one time, years ago in Lexington. And I had heard, I came out of a circle of Baptists where they were all Calvinists, and there were some that were true hyper-Calvinists. And some that leaned so hyper that they eventually ended up in the Primitive Baptist Church. You guys familiar with Primitive Baptists? The Primitive Baptists are true hyper-Calvinists. They believe the gospel is preached only for the comfort of the elect. So they think it's ridiculous to ask anybody to put their faith in Jesus. And they believe in eternal justification. So if you're elect, you're born already justified. That you don't get saved, you just discover that you are. So any so-called conversion experience is merely just the discovery that you're one of God's elect. All right, so that's true hyper-Calvinism, and to me, that's contrary to the gospel. Because I believe I can call on anybody to repent and to believe, that I can make a bona fide offer, if you will, you may. Hyper-Calvinists don't believe that. And so I was at this ordination, and we got to the place where somebody said, tell us about when you were saved. And he laughed. He said, well, a ladder almost fell on my head one time and didn't kill me. I guess you could say I was saved then. Now, I knew right then, I heard what he was doing. This was what hyper-Calvinists do. They say when the Philippian jailer says, what must I do to be saved? That he's referring to his physical life because he's about to kill himself. That's their explanation of that text. And they say that, when you talk about being saved, you're talking about being saved from death or some horrible thing. And so he started using that language. I knew right then, oh, this guy's hyper-Calvinist. And so I started asking questions because if he's really that, I'm not going to lay hands on him, and he needs to be exposed. And I began to probe, and to his credit, he was honest. He laid it out there. Do you believe you were justified when you were born? He said, I believe I was justified before I was born. Thank you very much. I'm done, right? So I said, I don't think we can proceed with the ordination. And I was outvoted. I wasn't mad or anything, but I promptly left. There was no point in me staying. I didn't walk out mad, but, as my dad used to say, don't go away mad, just go away. And that's what I did. I just went away. And they ordained him, and he pastored a little independent church, which within a year was a Primitive Baptist church. It changed the name to Primitive Baptist. And in my view, he stole the congregation. But, hey, at least he was honest about it. So to me, that the pastor was at fault. The pastor that brought him up for ordination should have known that and should not have brought him forward for ordination. So if I did that, it would be terribly embarrassing if a candidate in my church started answering questions that shocked me. I should know. You've got to be like a good lawyer. You should know the answer to every question before you ask it. And that's certainly true. If you're ordaining the guy, you should already know his doctrinal position. You're just letting the ordaining council hear. So the ordination council then can ask whatever questions they want. I was at an ordination one time when someone asked the candidate, do you tithe? And he was embarrassed to say, well, no, I don't tithe. And he gave the standard answer about, well, I don't think we're under the law. Okay. Well, the Bible's real clear about generosity, so how generous are you? What did you give? So, if they gave 10% under the law, what do you give under grace? And he was embarrassed to say he hadn't given really much of anything to his church. The council can ask anything, so you've got to be prepared for anything. The interrogator typically sticks to the script, but then they'll say, anybody else have questions? A lot of times, you'll be asked to tell about your most recent experience of sharing the gospel. be terrible for you to get in an ordination council. Your story's 2 years old. You better have recent witnessing experiences to tell about. So you can expect any of these things to come up in ordination. And as they ask the questions, and then you answer them, if the ordination council is satisfied that you are worthy of ordination, then they will take a vote and recommend to the church that they proceed with the ordination. Now, you can do this a couple ways. Typically at Buck Run, we don't do the interrogation publicly. So we're doing deacon ordination this Wednesday night, as a matter of fact. The ordination council will meet with our 2 deacons that we're ordaining at 5:30 Wednesday, and then we'll question them, and then at 6:30 the church will ordain them. I'll preach an ordination message, and then we'll have the laying on of hands. So you can do it at 2 different times. My dad, I think he was interrogated 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They came back at 7 o'clock that night for to finalize the ordination. You can do that, or you can put it all in one. With big churches, it's hard. So I sort of learned how to do it the way we do it from Adrian Rogers at Bellevue, because little churches, we could have special services and everybody would come. Those days are gone. We could have a Friday night ordination and just about everybody that was there on Sunday would come Friday night. That doesn't happen anymore. So you have to put it into one of your regular services, but like most churches have certain things they have to accomplish in those services. And to just totally take one presents other challenges, and child care and all those things. So at Buck Run, we do our ordinations on Wednesday night, and we'll have the interrogation 5:30, then the service at 6:30. The way it is, and I informed the church that we have the ordination council has met with them. They unanimously recommend the ordination of these men, and of course these are guys that were elected to serve as deacons. So then we will have I'll preach the ordination sermon. Then we have an ordaining prayer, and typically our chairman of deacons will pray that. And then everybody on the ordination council will come by and lay hands on the candidate and either pray over them or with them or say some kind of encouraging words to them. Each man can do whatever he wants. Now, when you've got, like at Buck Run right now, we have 33 elected deacons, and then we've got deacons that have served in the past that are ordained. We have we got pastors and former pastors that attend our church. So we'll have sometimes 50 men on the ordination council. If every one of them takes 1 minute, it's a long time. So I think the last time we did laying on of hands by the majority of our guys in the ordination council, and then just a few representative ones in the service. We might do that again this Wednesday night. It just takes up an awful lot of time. And again, with the people you always have to think about are child care workers. If the service goes long, that's who pays the price for it, child care workers. Everybody else is all right, but that's what you always have to keep an eye on. So so in the ordination service, you have the ordaining sermon. Typically the sermon can take 2 forms, one, either, or both. You have what's called the charge to the candidate and the charge to the church. Now, often in ordaining somebody who's going to, like say, a young man in your church has been called to pastor another church, the charge to the candidate is basically preaching to the young man exhorting him, encouraging him, admonishing him to be faithful and persevere. The charge to the church would then be, okay, you need to treat this guy right. You need to follow him. You need to encourage him. You need to bless him. You can have two different sermons where one preacher does one thing and one the other. That happened at my ordination. Brother Range preached the charge to the church, and my dad preached the charge to me. And that was a beautiful thing. But a lot of times you don't have time for that. And so whoever preaches has to do both. It's certainly more pronounced when you ordain a pastor than when you ordain deacons. We don't do charge to the candidate and the church per se, but you can. But that's the form that the sermon takes. Then you have the ordaining prayer, laying on of hands. Like I kneeled, and they used to have candidates kneel. I'm telling you, 50 minutes in a kneeling position, if you're not used to it, it'll kill you. My Asian friends, they can do this. Tanya and I were in Korea a few years ago. They have these prayer mountains, and you go out and they just pray and preach all night long. We walked in, and everybody's sitting on the floor. No chairs. I'm talking 80-year-old women sitting there cross-legged. These two Americans walk in. They offered us chairs. No. We didn't want to be sitting up in chairs, everybody else on the floor. But 15 minutes in, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can make this. They're used to it. They sit cross-legged and they kneel all the time. If you're not used to kneeling in an ordination service is physically hard on anybody who's not accustomed to it. And forgive me, I don't know if this makes me less spiritual, but I don't kneel when I pray most of the time. I'm sitting in a chair when I pray. I don't kneel and pray. So I'm not accustomed to praying. I'm not, as they call John, camel knees. I'm not that guy. So unless your candidate is like John and he's used to kneeling, put a chair there, let him sit in the chair while people go by and lay hands on him for however long it takes. At the end, we then have a presentation of the Bible, and I let a guy choose whatever Bible he wants. I mean, full goat skin, buffalo hide, ESV, whatever, Cambridge, whatever you want, we'll get it for you. And we present him with a Bible, have his wife come up and stand with him, and people come by and congratulate him. And that's the way the ordination service works. Again, scheduling that at Buck Run, we typically have one deacon ordination every year. Just about every year, our people will elect at least one, this year, 2 guys that have never served before, so we have to ordain them. But once a guy's ordained, he's ordained. He doesn't need to be ordained again. If he has Baptist ordination. So if someone joins our church, like Dr. Lyndall Ormsby was a deacon in Ashland Avenue. I was his pastor there. He now comes to Buck Run. He got elected to serve as deacon. We don't have to reordain him. We recognize Ashland Avenue as a sister church. His ordination there is valid at Buck Run, just like his baptism there would be valid at Buck Run. So that's the way ordination works. Now, I'll just take a few minutes and let you ask some questions. If you want to know anything about the call, licensing, ordination, and I'll do my best to answer if you've got something. Yes, sir. Okay, his question is, what about installation services? So when a pastor gets called, so he's already ordained, but the church having an installation service to mark him as the pastor. I think that's a great thing. I think it's a healthy thing. I've really only had it once, but out of the 3 churches I've pastored, only one did it, I think. The others, sort of my first service as pastor was like the installation service, but at Marion, the first church I pastored while I was in seminary, I was youth pastor for a month before the pastor resigned, And when he resigned, they asked me to be the interim pastor. And after 4 months, they asked me then to be the pastor. So I was already there, and we wanted to have a service that just sort of marked it and celebrated it, and we did, and I liked it. So an installation service, I think, is a good way to bring everybody together behind this pastor. If you have an installation service, you can have someone else come in. It's also good now with video to have, if you've got people you respect and love in the ministry, to do little short videos and congratulate the church on calling the guy. Honestly, it's not a bad thing for you to get the church excited about you being their pastor. This isn't, it could be a prideful thing, but I would just tell you, my motive would not be to say, look how great I am. But here's what I've learned. In any relationship, the better you feel about each other, the better the relationship goes, right? So if you're dating a girl that you think I could have done better, that relationship's not going to go well, right? And if you're in a marriage where you're always going around thinking, I should have married up, I really married beneath myself, your marriage is not in good shape. So the ideal marriage is to say, man, I got the absolute best I could ever get. She is the tops for me. And you want her feeling that way about you. Well, I want you to know, you come to Buck Run, I think at Buck Run, you get a sense both ways. My church adores me, and I adore them. There's no church I'd rather pastor. I can say in all candor, I don't think I'd leave Buck Run at all at this stage to go do something else. There's no job I'm interested in. Like all these openings that have come, there's just no leading in my heart to any of them. I'm going to be at Buck Run until I think God's done with me at Buck Run. But I think they're the best. There's no church I want to pastor. And I think at this point, they feel that way about me. Well, that's an ideal thing. If the pastor goes, man, this is the greatest church in the world. And the church thinks, we got the best pastor in the world. This is a happy, happy marriage. Do I do things that I hope will encourage the church to think I'm a good pastor? Yeah, I do. I like them to hear other people say good things about me. And I don't do that out of a sense of pride, but out of a sense of, I want us to stay happy with each other. And so I think an installation service helps that. You want the people to know who they called, what your priorities are going to be. And videos from other people that say, hey, church, I want to congratulate you on calling Billy Bumfuzzle as your pastor. I've known him for so long, and he has always shown me he has such a heart for God. He's got great character. He's a tremendous preacher. You are going to be so blessed under his ministry. Congratulations on such a successful conclusion to your search. Well, man, that just helps. It makes them feel good about their process and what they did, and good about you. And so an installation service can accomplish some of that, and I think that's a good and healthy thing. It's also an opportunity for you to say, you need to put it on the line and say, church, here's what I'm committing to do for you. I'm going to be faithful. You're never going to have to wonder about, whether or not I'm inappropriate with women. I will not be inappropriate with women. I mean, just put yourself out on the line like that. Let them hear you say some things. Make some commitments to them. And I think an installation service is a good way to do that. Does that answer? Other question? Nothing else? All right. Yeah. Okay, so the church typically puts out a call, like in a Baptist context, you would historically let all the churches in your association know you're going to have an ordination, and whatever church your candidate is going to. Like, so when we ordained Michael, my son, there were people from First Lancaster that drove over from Lancaster to attend that ordination. Now, churches are rarely doing this on a weeknight now. So typically, other churches in the association aren't going to attend because you're doing it on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night when they have services. So that's why this is sort of it's almost a moot point. We're doing most of our ordinations by ourselves, plus anybody who's connected to the candidate. So if the candidate's dad is a pastor or a deacon in another state, they might attend, but historically, you would invite all other sister churches that your church fellowships with and wherever the candidate is going. Any of their ordained brothers are welcome. Now, notice I say brothers. Since we're complementarian at Buck Run, we would not recognize an ordained woman to sit on the council because of our position on it. And that's why we say ordained brothers. But any ordained Baptist pastor or deacon is welcome to sit on that. I'll say any sound Baptist, because there's a church in town in Frankfort that have the name Baptist on the shingle out front. They don't get anywhere near the gospel. They're just not, they mock the atonement. Now, there's really no danger any of them are going to show up at our ordination, but if they did, they would not be welcome. So there's basically the line of fellowship. Whoever you would exchange church letters with, for instance, or whoever's baptism you would recognize, their ordained brothers could sit on the council. But that's truly up to the church. Remember, it is the local church that ordains, so the local church has the final say in who may sit on that council.